Namaste, good evening everybody. Welcome in the Temple of Light at Assisi. Today is December 1st and the Advent, the weeks leading to the Christmas, have just started. I'm Darshan, and for this special period I would like to share a little bit about the teachings of Jesus Christ as commented, as presented by great master of yoga of modern times, Paramahansa Yogananda, and his direct disciple, Swami Kriyananda. Those of you who know us know that we sing a lot, and yogic chanting is not just chanting to please an audience or for musical reasons. It is we chant to transform our energy, to uplift our consciousness. So I'd like to start with a little bit of chanting, only a few minutes, and the words are very simple. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, cloud-colored Christ, come. It's a chant that Yogananda himself used to sing very often, especially during this Christmas period. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. Cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. O my Christ, 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 Jesus Christ, come. Let's meditate for a minute. Just sit upright in your chair. Look up, as Jesus said, to where the harvest is already plenty, at the point between the eyebrows. Just try to focus your mind there and relax. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So you may wonder how come that a great yoga master of modern times, not Christian born, not born into a Christian family moreover, but in Hindu family in India, has the authority, let's say, to represent, to interpret the teachings of Christ in such an extremely inspiring way. The background to this, there is a teaching on the path of Kriya Yoga that says that our earth goes through different eras, and 4 to be precise. Now we're not going into this teaching, it's very vast, but suffice it to say that Jesus Christ lived in a descending cycle of what is named Kali Yuga, in which the sun is far away from the center of the Milky Way, of the galaxy, and mankind as a whole receives not much light, not much energy to enlighten him, to enlighten his brain. So people during Kali Yuga were unable to look beyond form. They were heavy. They were, you might say, they also considered their bodies as only matter. And so their body became like a prison because it was subject to pain and to disease and so on. And around 1900, so about 121 years ago, the Earth moved in what is called Dwapara Yuga proper. Okay, there had already been a transition phase, but in this new age, mankind receives a little bit more energy coming from the center of the galaxy. This is all astrology and astronomy mixed, let's say, but it is how the masters of Kriya Yoga describe it. So mankind receives a little bit more energy and is now able to see and to perceive matter as a manifestation of energy. And so if matter is energy, it has been scientifically demonstrated, of course, but you can also apply it on your own consciousness, especially when it comes to your physical body, because if matter is energy, then your physical body is also energy. And when you know that, and you just don't know it only intellectually, but you know it also intuitively, you can feel it and you can work with it, then of course this opens doors to a greater exploration of, a deeper exploring of meditation and soul searching and enlightenment, because we are less prison of a physical body that can die at any moment, so to speak. So my own teacher, she lives here too, her name is Shivani, and she gave me teacher's training some years ago. And I remember I was struck by one thing that she mentioned. She said, and we were talking about the different paths of yoga, which is bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, karma yoga, the path of action, jnana yoga, the path of wisdom, introspection, and raja yoga, the path of meditation, and kriya yoga, the deepest meditation technique. And she said the main path to God under Kali Yuga was bhakti yoga, whereas the main path to God during Dwapara Yuga is Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. So let's try to understand this a little bit. When you look at Kali Yuga, where the form, so I can give you actually a personal example. I was, not so long ago, maybe a month and a half ago, I was traveling for Ananda through France. And I was driving, I had been in 2 different places, and I was on my way to Amsterdam, and it was too far, so I stayed overnight in a hotel in Reims, which is a city in the northeast, I believe. And it's famous because of a beautiful Gothic cathedral. So when we think of Kali Yuga, we mainly think of the Middle Ages, where really, it went on for a while, but in the Middle Ages, let's say, was the depth of ignorance, and where the main cause of death was not even old age, it was not sickness, it was violence, for example. There was no movement, there was no social mobility. You were born in a social class, you were dying, you were going to die in that same class. You were born in a certain place, and you were going to die in this, and you were going to die in that same place. So it was very static. And so I came there, I arrived in that city in Reims in the evening, late in the evening, and I had little time the next morning to walk through the city and to visit that cathedral, which was an important building, is an important building for the history of Christianity. It was where they say the first king of the Franks was baptized as a Christian. His name was Clovis. It was a very good, astute political choice at that time. But later on, a saint like Joan of Arc came in the church, and so I went there the next morning, and I enjoyed it. And at a certain point, there was a beautiful statue somewhere in one of the side chapels of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that's where I chose to sit and meditate. And I myself have not had any religious upbringing. I come from Amsterdam, which is probably the least religious city in the whole world. But Jesus was important for me even when I was a child. It came from within, from my own soul. So I sat down in the church and I meditated a little bit, and I had my devotion. I felt my devotion for the Divine Mother, which is how I call her and how she's generally called by devotees of this path of Kriya Yoga. And all of a sudden I could understand that when you live in a period when there is no science to spirituality, there is no methodology to spirituality, all you have is your own heart. There's nothing else. So when you are born then with a spiritual karma and you have it in you to become saintly, then all you have is your heart. So devotion, bhakti yoga. You pray, you grasp Divine Mother's or Jesus's clothes, and you just don't, you hang on to it, you never let go, and that's the only chance you had. And in fact, the lives of people from that period, from saintly people from that whole period, confirm this. Now, back to our period, our era, let's say, Dwapara Yuga, where spirituality has become much more scientific. We've said man now knows, people now know that matter is energy, and so the body is also energy. And Yogananda himself developed these energization exercises, and the whole purpose of those exercises is to realize and to go deep into that realization that the physical body is energy. And then through that energy, you can learn the highest, what is presented as the highest technique of meditation, which is Kriya Yoga, which is like the core of Raja Yoga and meditation, the practice of meditation. So, but on the other, there's another side to that. It's not that devotion becomes less important because we have science, we have methodology, we have meditation techniques. I remember years ago, I was reading a little booklet by a Dutch journalist, and a Dutch writer actually he was. And the Dutch tend to, they're not easy, not very sentimental by nature. They're not even very feeling oriented, I'm afraid. And so he was describing, he had written a little booklet about the lives of some saints, like one of them being Joseph of Cupertino, who was a saint who lived not far from here, about 100 kilometers away from here. And he had particular forms of ecstasy where his body lost its weight and he began to levitate. And then this writer, when he tells the story of this little monk who became, of course, a very important presence in his own times and later on, he said, they say that nowadays you can take courses and learn how to levitate. And then he adds very wryly or a little bit sarcastically maybe, he said, I don't believe that. I think that everything has a price. And he struck a very deep string with that, chord with that, because meditation, spirituality can never be technique alone. It can't. It would be mechanical. Even the technique of Kriya Yoga, because it is so sacred, it is not given, it's not just taught in a class. It is given through a form of initiation with a particular touch where the magnetism of the master is transmitted and given to the disciple. But on the other hand, you can probably find, even though the technique is kept secret, and Yogananda doesn't reveal it, for example, in his autobiography of a yogi, although he writes a whole chapter about Kriya Yoga, still you can find it maybe on the internet. Nowadays you can find everything on the internet, but what do you have when you have that? You have nothing. You have a technique. What you need behind it is devotion, and you need spiritual intimacy. And you need to have made the choice that that union, that spiritual path, that spiritual longing is the most important thing in your life. And that is where Jesus comes into the picture. Also Yogananda, obviously, he was very, of course, a great master of bhakti yoga, but he taught techniques, he taught the energization exercises, he worked with the knowledge available in this modern era. That knowledge was not available in the times when Jesus lived. But what does he teach them? Because Jesus is considered by us to be he's one of our masters. He's considered to be a master of Kriya Yoga. But then, what does he teach? And that doesn't mean that we claim him, obviously, but we draw from him. So what does he teach? He teaches, from what I understand, the attitudes of yoga. So, for example, this era of energy in which we live now tends to be, it's not an era of enlightenment. Of course, it helps a lot when you feel that your body is energy. It takes away maybe a lot of fear. But it is also an age of individualism, and a little bit like there is still a lot of hypocrisy in politics, and it will remain like that. And also there is like a merchant mentality. Now, with a merchant mentality, you cannot progress spiritually. And what can the temptation be? So you learn a technique, and you learn a very effective meditation technique. But you do not put your whole self into it. You do not meditate as an act of devotion, as an act of renouncing smaller things because you want that greater thing that awaits you within. You meditate just, for example, to develop, for example, material magnetism, money magnetism. There's a lot of courses about that, and they function, they work. Or with Kriya Yoga, it is said that you can, Yogananda describes the efficacy of Kriya by saying that one Kriya breath, properly performed, equals 1 year of natural spiritual growth. Now, when you take that without devotion and you take it with a merchant mentality, and then you say, of course, oh, that's great, I'll do 108 Kriyas 2 times a day because then I get more enlightenment. Now, of course, it doesn't work like that. And that is where Jesus comes in with his grace, and also Yogananda. Again, I mean, he interprets Jesus, he brings Jesus close to us. And he describes then the basic attitudes, the hard work that is needed, not just as a yogi, but also as a human being, that needs to be performed on yourself in order to really make some progress. It's hard work, it's also joyful work, of course, because when you do it, when you accept it and you start to grow, then of course you feel also a growing sense of joy in yourself, in your own heart, in your energy increases. That's the beauty of the spiritual path, that on the one hand, it's difficult, we need to work on ourselves, but the more we accept the challenge and the more we do work on ourselves, the more we feel that we're growing. And when there is growth, there is joy. So, let's see, there was something more that I wanted to say. Yes, so let's then today talk a little bit about a particular passage from the Bible, very famous, the famous Sermon on the Mount. Like I said before, I had a special, very intimate bond with Jesus even when I was a child, even though it was not at all brought to me by my parents. But my father, rather, I brought my father. I asked him 1,000 questions about Jesus, and there was a Catholic church around the corner. I asked my father to take me there, and I watched the Stations of the Cross, and I asked my father to explain each painting. And even when I close my eyes now, I can see that light. I can see Jesus there. It's as if it was now, right here now. And then I had a particular moment. I was always very keen on reading, even as a child. And I had found a very old Bible in my father's bookcase. And in fact, my father passed away 6 years ago, and I looked for it everywhere, and I couldn't find it. I was very sorry that I couldn't find it. It was very old indeed. It was also old language. But I remember maybe I was 10 years old, and I was alone at home, and I was sitting in the living room, and I was opening that book, and the Sermon on the Mount. So I was reading that, and of course I couldn't understand it, but there was a lot of imagination. I could see it inside. It was as if I was standing or sitting near Jesus, like behind him, and he was talking to the people. He was much more than talking to the people. There was this enormous power behind it. And it was a very important moment in my own childhood. I never even felt tempted to speak about it with anyone. Now I'm telling this story almost every time I have to share something about Jesus. I'm telling this story because it's so particular that without religion, you can still have a bond with this great sea of light that Jesus was. And so that was the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what I would like to do is just see how far we can get with it. But I would like to read part of that with you and then sort of share with you what Yogananda writes about it, what Yogananda's direct disciple writes about it, and also some of my own inner understanding of that and experience with that. So, first of all, it is a particular moment, probably more towards the beginning of Jesus' mission. And he is out, he's not in a city, and his magnetism already draws a lot of people to him. It was a period, Yogananda says, where the Jewish people, for karmic reasons, there were a lot of people were born with handicaps. They could be blind, they could be, with one leg, or it was a very intense karmic period of suffering, physical suffering for the Jewish people, and moreover also political suffering, because Israel had been colonized by the Romans, of course. So a man like him brought hope. They could feel it in his aura. So he drew a lot of people to him. But his teaching was not for the multitudes. His teaching is for, I wouldn't say for the few or for the happy few, but it's for the intimate, sincere spiritual seeker, like you and I. And so we want something that really speaks to our heart and that speaks to our soul. We don't want any religious platitudes. And we want to feel when we listen that there is an intimacy there, something that speaks to our heart and that is so maybe more intimate than any other human relationship could be. Because how is it possible that a man who lives 2,000 years ago can open his mouth and then speak and touch my soul and my heart? There is an intimacy on a soul level, and that is possible. So Jesus then he said, okay, he saw the multitudes. Here you can see it. I can actually, no, I haven't got it written, yeah. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, and then it continues. So you can see that he withdrew from the multitude, and only a few followed him, because, and that gives like a sharp contrast between worldly consciousness and spiritual consciousness. Worldly consciousness is not interested in what is special, when it becomes special, when it becomes intimate, when it becomes deeper feelings. Worldly consciousness is more interested in distractions and staying at the surface at all costs, okay? Because what's under there, that probably people are afraid of that. So in any case, they follow him, a few people follow him, and they go on the mountain, and he sits down. So here it says, when he was set, his disciples came unto him. So I could see, usually you would think that a teacher, when he speaks to his students, he will stand. But Jesus sits down, and then, after he has sat down, his disciples come to him. So this is what in yoga is called asana. That means posture. So he probably sits, and he sits, of course, with a straight spine, and he goes into a deep state of, a higher state of consciousness. So it's like a meditation. And then when the disciples, the real disciples that are destined to be near him until the end, they can feel that and they come to him. So it's like almost like a natural selection. And then the Bible says he opened his mouth and taught them. And Yogananda here says that he did much more than just talking. Okay, he conveys, he says, Jesus conveys his spiritual magnetism to those disciples who have followed him and who are able to receive that. So his presence and the sound of his voice and also his eyes and his whole aura have a calming effect on the disciple, on those who are near him, and they can sit down and they can completely attune themselves or open their hearts to him so that he can come in and bring his light and bring his blessings. So Jesus then starts with saying, blessed are, and he says it like, I think he says it 6 times or something. Blessed are the merciful. Let's see, I didn't even check that. So I see here 9. 9 times he says, blessed are. Like the first one, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So this has then become known as the Beatitudes, and which means that if you cultivate the attitude that Jesus here describes, the state of consciousness that Jesus described, you become blessed, blissful, intensely happy. Not just because you're being a good boy or a good girl, but because the bliss is part of our own deeper being, of our own real being, that's inner being. And so when we develop attitudes that allow us to reconnect, let's say, with that inner bliss, then we are supremely happy, extremely happy. That's how Yogananda says it. A beatitude is something that is bestowed on you. You might say you receive it and you become supremely happy. So that's a good way to start this. So the first beatitude then is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then Swami Kriyananda gives a very short paraphrase. He says, blessed are they who rejoice in their own unimportance in the great scheme of things. By their non-attachment to ego, they live even now in a state of heavenly bliss. So poor in spirit then means that there is very little ego or attachment or possessions or claims that distract the consciousness from the spirit. So the spirit is poor, it doesn't need to worry about anything, least of all the recognition of other people. It is just blissful in itself. So the less you as a devotee, I as a devotee, worry about things like, for example, speaking about my own meditations with other people, saying like, I meditated 5 hours last night, or I had this wonderful inner experience. But the real effect of meditation and of inner communion, you might call it, is that you have less to say, basically. The desire to speak becomes weaker. And there grows a love of silence. And just because the more you are immersed in the spirit, in the bliss of your own being, the less there is really to say. But if you're not poor in spirit, you want to talk with other people about your meditation, your spirituality, and even in general. So I remember there was a period, I was much younger, and I had a lot of enthusiasm and ambition, and it was not always clear whether it was where the enthusiasm stopped and the ambition started, but as a musician, and I had other ambitions, and I always felt sort of handicapped because my father never supported me in my talents. My mother almost competed with me. That's how I perceived it, at least. And so I felt like I needed the support of my parents. I needed their recognition, and then I would have been happy. But I was not happy because I didn't feel that I had the power to realize my dreams and ambitions and to fully develop my talents. And so that went on for a period, and then at a certain point, a friend of mine, who was a very wise man, he was a Christian, by the way, and he was very telepathic. He could see people's auras, and he used his hands to do what is now called prana therapy. And he said, why don't you just accept those folks as they are? Why should they be any different from what they are? Why would you need anything from them that they cannot give? It's like expecting bread from a stone. Yeah? If you want bread, you have to go somewhere else. You cannot just take a stone. So I started working on that acceptance, and I started taking it very, very seriously, and my spirit became poorer, you might say. I became less dependent on my parents' recognition, and less and less and less and less. And at a certain point, there was just a fullness in myself, and finally also part of the ambitions were gone. I was still who I was, and I liked to realize, to foster my talents and share them with people, but the ambition was mostly gone. It was there just in the right amount that it didn't make me suffer or cause any anxiety or fear within me. So I remember when I was in Holland, I was trying to start a meditation group. I was very young, and so there were a few people who had reacted to I think I put something like an ad in the spiritual magazine or something. So one young lady came, she sat down, and in like 10 or 15 minutes, she had told me that she had this vision of Babaji and that vision of Jesus and of her spiritual powers and all that kind of things. And I was sitting there, and what I noticed is that my mind, I had my concentration just weakened. I couldn't follow her. I was just, there was so, in this ego display, such a lack of power and genuine human feeling even. There was nothing in it. So, we have these little memories, but what can we do for ourselves to become poor in spirit? Just make your path with God, your approach to your spiritual growth simple. Speak about it very little. When you work with fellow disciples, for example, try to keep it simple. Don't try to, for example, claim seniority, saying, I've been on this path much longer and I have a religious title or a spiritual title, or I'm a monk, or don't you think I should know? Try not to do that. Try just to be, to make that space of intimacy between you and the Heavenly Father, or you and Christ. Try to safeguard that as much as possible. And you will find that you can do with fewer words, and people will just, things can flow again when your ego is not in the way, let's say. People trust you because they don't see ego, they see light. And that's what you want, okay? So the second, then Jesus says, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. So Swami Kriyananda paraphrases it like this. He says, blessed are they who mourn the seeming absence of God. Them will he comfort with his love. This is another way of saying, and I can repeat what Yogananda said also to his disciples, said, no one can give you the love of God. No one can give you devotion. You have to develop that yourself. And it seems a little bit unfair, right? Because when you, for example, we know what love is. We're born into a family, we love our parents, we love our family, and then maybe we fall in love when we're like 14 years old or something, and that then becomes an extremely important experience for us. And then maybe later on, we meet the love of our lives and we marry. And so it's not that we are a stranger to love, right? But then devotion, the love of God, I need to develop it myself. That's a big task, I think. And I've thought about it a lot, and I do develop it myself. It is important for me because I'm just much happier when I think of my Divine Mother as much as possible, when I chant to her, when I try to pray to her and to feel and see her presence and call her name. And those things are extremely important for me. But the answer to me is this. So here basically Jesus is saying, Bhakti Yoga, don't be indifferent. Beat indifference. Become sensitive and develop a feeling of love for God and trust. Call him your Father, but not just a father, a stern father, but a loving Father who will go out of his way to find you when you are lost. Or call her your mother, okay? So, a wonderful example of this we can find in the autobiography of a yogi. Mourning and grief, I think, are a part of everyone's life, every human life. And no one is spared, really. We all have to lose our dear ones at some time before we ourselves go. But we lose our parents, we may lose friends, especially now this period. Also, many people have lost loved ones, and it's hard. So that type of mourning is not, Yogananda says, the type of mourning that Jesus is talking about. This goes much deeper. You're mourning because you can't feel the presence of God in your heart. You want to feel it, but you can't. And that is a torture of the spirit. So Yogananda, in his autobiography, describes a very intense episode of grief when his own earthly mother dies. And he's only 9 years old, and he said, my mother was the most important thing in my life. Her eyes brought me solace in, the trifling tragedies of childhood or something. And he felt that when his mother died, he couldn't live. He couldn't bear to live in a world that all of a sudden didn't make sense anymore. So his mourning was deep. His grief was very deep. And he said, that what he did, however, was not passive. He didn't just sit down. There are people who, I think psychology says grief when you lose a loved one should, when it's healthy grief, in other words, when it's natural, should not last more than 2 years. And then you still think of the person that has gone, but it gets a place in your life. It's integrated. It's no longer overwhelming. But there are also people who grieve, for the rest of their lives. Now, that's not what Yogananda meant. He said, I stormed the gates of heavens with my prayers. And he wanted an answer. So this loss of the dearest thing that he had in his life on earth, this loss actually stimulated him with great resolve to find a true solution, true comfort, not the comfort that comes when, his father had remained and did a lot, of course, to help fill the void that was left when the mother was no longer there. But that type of comfort is not enough. Yogananda said, the soul will never be happy with anything less than perfection. So we should remember that. The soul will never be happy or satisfied with anything less than perfection. So Yogananda, instead of this little boy, Mukunda, instead of just wailing, he cries, yes, but he cries because he's calling his Divine Mother. And only after many years, he says, did she come and did she appear to him and said, I am your Divine Mother. I have always loved you, and I have loved you through many mothers and breastfed you through many mothers in many different incarnations. And that the healing that then came in Yogananda's heart, that was true healing. There was complete healing. There was not just mediocre comfort. No, it was deep healing of trauma. So, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. So, when we really begin to see that only God's presence, that only enlightenment of the soul, that only that inner dimension can bring us lasting happiness and also abundance of feeling in our lives, abundance of love in our lives, and infinite also, unconditional and infinite type of love, then only then will God come to us. So you might say that devotion is love, and we all know what love is, but you add to that love, you have to add resolve, willpower, concentration, meditation. So spiritual discipline. And anatomically speaking, you have the heart chakra, and we have what Yogananda says, the Kutastha Chaitanya, the Christ center. This is where the real Christ is seated at the point between the eyebrows. So he says, when you chant, when you pray, when you meditate, you connect the natural feelings of the heart with the willpower, the vision, the concentration of the spiritual eye. And then love becomes steady, deep. It is mainly between the devotee and his Divine Mother or his Guru. But then when you go into your world and you go to your family and you go to your loved ones, then you will be a channel of that love. You don't need to do anything because you have it, and other people will feel loved, not by you, but through you. So let's do one more. The third, he says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And Swami Kriyananda paraphrases saying, blessed are they who live not aggressively or self-assertively, but in harmony with nature and divine law, for they shall be supported in return. So meekness is not something, it's not being a good boy or being pious or something. It has nothing to do with it. There is a power behind meekness. Only it cannot be seen unless you already have a certain level of, you might say, refinement, where you can see that it really works. That when you calm your heart and your mind in your relationship with nature, with plants, with animals, and with other people also, then there is a communion with nature. So where I live, where we live actually, around there are hunters. And I live about 15 minutes drive away from this temple, where I'm now sharing and talking with you. And it was in the middle of nowhere, basically. Our house is in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. We have beautiful view. There's no one around. It's pure nature, and that's what we love about it. But there are hunters, and we have dogs. We have one dog who is still pretty young. It's they call it the Tuscan Shepherd, and they are very close to wolves in their characters. So one morning I was working. I usually work from my own home, and I hear the dog bark very loudly, and I see there is this hunter who's with like 6 or 7 dogs getting onto my dog's land, you know. He didn't go off his own territory, but he attacked those hunting dogs. And the hunter, who had already met me before, he came and he yelled at me, and he threw some swear words at me and even cursed, I think. And so I didn't know what to say. I didn't say anything. And he went away. Then I took a walk, and I somehow felt, sort of an anger came up in me. This is a hunter. You can hear them shout. You can hear them shoot animals. And the hunter in me, some ancient being from many incarnations ago, was wakened. The lion in me or the hunter in me. And so there came these half-conscious or subconscious fantasies of having my own rifle, and like in the American Western, say, get up my land, and take the, don't even bother about the dog. They say, don't bother about the dog. Here I guard this place, the owner, and then you see the owner with a rifle or with a gun. But of course I'm a yogi, so I observed those aggressive fantasies in my subconscious mind, and I had just enough progress not to take them seriously. And so I actually went the other way. I said, no, this doesn't make any sense. Calm down. It doesn't matter whose world is this anyway. It's not my land, it's God's land. And I took my thoughts into I became meek again, harmonious. I was looking for harmony. I was looking for ahimsa, non-violence. So I came back home, and then like 10 minutes later, I hear the klaxon, the horn, and this same hunter had come to me with his car, and in the meantime, he had showered, and he was neatly dressed, and he showed me a picture on his cell phone of one of his hunting dogs that had been bitten by my dog. And he said, well, he was pretty wounded, and I had to stitch it myself and disinfect it. And you know how much a hunting dog costs? It costs at least 5,000 euros. But then, at that point, I had already reestablished, let's say, enough meekness, calmness, harmony in my heart. And he calmed down too. And then he said, well, you don't need to worry. Maybe you should insure your dog. Maybe you should try to confine him when we are hunting. And so this whole, what started with an episode of anger then, ended in harmony. And I felt that it could go either way when these things happened between neighbors, because this hunter was our neighbor, even though his house was like a mile away from my own house, was still my neighbor. But it can go either way. You can have terrible conflicts between neighbors, can't you? But when your mind is set on harmony, then somehow nature itself begins to cooperate with you. I'm not a gardener, But there are a lot of gardeners here. My own partner is a gardener, and she works on our land. And there is this feeling when we, in this community, and in every spiritual community, I think that when we work with the land, we're not trying to impose anything on the land, on the nature, or on the animals. We're not trying to take away freedom from our animals. We're trying to commune with them and ask and pray. And that is when you can say you inherit the earth, when you try to live in harmony with nature by, I think the first thing to do is to practice ahimsa, so to eradicate every thought of aggression from your heart and of greed and things like that, and self-defense. And then you just calm the deeper feelings in the heart, and then you relate to animals and nature, and you will see that you really do inherit the earth. Wherever you come, it's yours. Okay, we'll do one more, and then I hope we can continue. Probably in January, we have a nice program. There will be actually satsang the next one will be in Italian, there will be satsang in German, in French, and the English one we will also pick up very soon. And of course you will be notified, and then we can continue this wonderful Sermon on the Mount. So just one more, and then we'll stop. Jesus says, and it's the fourth Beatitude, he says, "Blessed are they who do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And Swami Kriyananda gives the paraphrase. He says, "Blessed are they who seek attunement to truth. They alone of all human beings shall find lasting fulfillment." So Swami Kriyananda's own story is actually tells this story, because when he was young, he was desperate. He was maybe 18, and he knew what he didn't want, but he didn't know what he wanted. He wanted truth. That's how he describes it later. But what he didn't want was just the ordinary American career, Western career, school, high school, university, graduation, a job, a career, a wife, a house, a car, children. And to him that was just like, he'd rather die. It was like an empty husk of a life that he could see in front of him, and it's not what he wanted. He wanted a deeper answer. He wanted a definitive answer. And he said, "I wanted truth." And so he describes it in many different ways. He tries to find it, but then he comes to the conclusion through some very strong inner experience that he describes many times. You can look at his own talks. He describes it many times in his life, that during a walk, he feels that he is part of a higher type of consciousness, and that he can only intellectually perceive that consciousness, but he can't feel it. And so he feels that the true purpose of life is to reconnect with that cosmic consciousness that is God. In fact, Yogananda says, "Nothing is greater than God or cosmic consciousness," he writes in some place. So so there is this intense hunger and thirst after righteousness or truth, of having something real in your life. And if you really want that, then you will be filled. But again, if you don't really want it, then you don't get it. The universe just gives you basically exactly as much as you ask from it. If you ask a job and money and a family, then of course there's your karma, but probably that will at least be where your energy will be. And you can stay there for a lifetime. Actually, you can stay there for many lifetimes. Or you say, no, I live in this body, maybe, 80, 90 years. I want something real that transcends the limitations of my consciousness. And I want to learn how to do it. And I'm thirsty, and I'm hungry. So Yogananda says these are very apt adjectives when it comes to your relationship with the truth. I'm thirsty for the truth. I want the truth. I'm hungry for the truth. I need it. I want nothing else. And then the answer comes. And that was my experience when I met actually Swami Kriyananda. But it was Kriyananda's experience when as a young boy in 1948, he met Paramahansa Yogananda. And many people, so he read that book, he read the autobiography of a yogi, he went to Los Angeles where Yogananda then lived, and he was accepted as a disciple. And I always felt that when he went into that room, little room where the master gave him an interview, many of us were following him because he was determined to share what he received with as many people as he could. But here the most important thing is be hungry for truth, be thirsty for truth, grieve for God, cry for God, be grateful always, every moment of your life. Practice the presence of God. So this is only the fourth, and it's been a deep joy for me actually to be able to talk about this, about Jesus, and about, you can feel his presence. I don't know if you can feel it, but Christmas is coming now, and the more we can, you don't need to understand intellectually these teachings. Of course, that is important, but just make sure that when you read a little bit from Jesus, from the Bible, or commentaries of Yogananda or Swami Kriyananda, just make sure that you attune yourself to it. And then everything becomes lighter, everything becomes deeper, and you become stronger. Well, that's the most important thing. So thank you. Thank you very much, and I hope we can continue going into the Sermon on the Mount in the beginning of January. Namaste.